Dear students, welcome to this inaugural session of Chapter 3, the Environment and of Organizations and Managers. I am your course instructor, Mohammad Atikul Bashar. So in this chapter, we are going to talk about the nature of organizational environment and identify the environments of interest to most organizations. As you can see, when we are talking about environment, the horizon of environment can be vast. It can cover many different factors and dimensions that can be considered. However, since you are a business school student, or since you are going to join as a management person in an organization, we are going to talk about the which environmental components you need to put more attention to in order to become a key decision maker. We are going to talk about general and task environment. So I will give more clarity when I'm going to talk about these points in the relevant slide. We are going to talk about the internal environment. So by now, as you have gone through the chapters, you might think that the horizon of management might only cover the internal area of the organization. That's not entirely true. When you are going to be a decision maker for an organization, you shouldn't only consider the internal environment. You must consider what's happening outside the organization too. So we're going to talk about that as well. And aside from talking about the environmental components, this chapter is going to cover the culture aspects of the organization. Now, there is a saying that culture is strategy for breakfast. So, hopefully by the end of this chapter, you will understand why culture is such an important component when it comes to the environment of a business organization that manager has to consider. Then you will have to identify and describe how the organization affects the how the how environment affects organizations and how organizations adapt. So yes, environment is uncertain, environment can be dynamic, but organizations can adapt mechanisms, decision-making tools that can help them to overcome the environmental barriers and understand the environment better. So we are going to talk about those more environmental tools and models. Hopefully you will get some understanding about these models and tools by the end of this chapter. So much without further ado, let's talk about the organization environmental components. Basically, you can segment the organization's environment into two different types. Let me clarify the internal environment. So as the name suggests, this is the environmental component that, to be more to be more specific, that remains within the organization's premises. So these are the forces and conditions that work within an organization. So it can include anything that organization uses to run the business, like land, let's say L for land, LA, labor, capital, and information. So I want you to think that when you are visualizing BRAC University, within the BRAC University, what are the resources that BRAC University has? It has its own lab, it has its own classroom, it has its mission, vision, and values, it has its competent management team, then its set of instructors in each and every different schools. All these things are part of the BRAC University's internal environment. Another way you can discern the internal environment, if you have gone through SWOT analysis, internal environment covers of strength, weakness, opportunity, threat. Internal environment covers these two parts. So internal environment consists of something that can either give strength to the organization or causes weakness to the organization, because of which they cannot pursue opportunity and faces threat. So all those factors are included in the internal environment. Now let's focus on the external environment. What does external environment cover? And now this is something very critical part of this chapter, because external environment is very vast in horizon. As I was saying earlier, it can be complicated. However, you need to understand that unlike the internal environment, which has components that is mostly controllable, external environment have two different types that can be either controllable or uncontrollable. What are these factors? So let's talk about the task environment first. Task environment is those component of environment that can be to some extent controlled. Number one, do remember that. Number two is that task environment covers those environmental components that is very specific to an industry and that is very close to the organization. So bear in mind that task environment covers those environmental components which are those parties that are very close to the organization, and if something happens to these environmental parties, stakeholders, that can instantly affect the firm, instantly cause some damage to the firm, some or if something positive happens to them in the vice versa situation, that can positively affect the firm as well. So we will give more example in the upcoming slides. General environment, on the other hand, is talking about everything outside the organization's boundaries. However, this is not the entire statement. It's everything outside the organization's boundaries that is vast in horizon, number one, that is mostly uncontrollable. Being a business organization, unless you are running a somewhat monopolistic organization, it is quite impossible for you to influence these factors. These factors might include a country's economy, its legal system, political system, socio-cultural, international, and technical forces. We will talk about this in detail. So look into this diagram, and it's perpetuating the same points that I've covered. You can look into the international dimension, technological dimension. All these are part of the general environment, and these are mostly uncontrollable. The task environment covers relatively external environmental factors that are relatively closer to the business organization. Think about the strategic partners. Think about the suppliers of the business organization. So today, if you have two suppliers as a business owner, in tomorrow, you can increase the number of suppliers you have to 4 or to 5 and or to any number. Same way, competitors are very close to the business organization. However, competitor, even though you cannot control the number of competitors, but you can certainly take courses of action that can affect your competition. You can take actions that can eliminate competition. And same goes for customers. You can have customers and you can decide to which set of customers you can go for. If you are you can either target the rich 20% customer, or you can go for middle 80%, middle to bottom 80% customer. You have that choice to decide which environmental component to go for. But as for these components that are tick mark here, they are quite uncontrollable. You need to figure out, in most cases, how to adapt yourself with these dimensions. So before we move on to the details of these dimensions, do understand that there is a tool called pest analysis that you need to understand and use when you are doing environmental analysis. When you are trying to understand a new country's general environment, that can give you clarity about its overall context. So it can include political, legal dimension, it can cover economic dimension, social cultural dimension, technological dimension, and international dimension. So let's look at each one of them one by one. First and foremost, let's talk about the political dimension. Political dimension is talking about the government regulation of business and relationship between business and government. Now, in terms of this point, the different countries around the world, which I believe there are 200 countries around the world, based on this factor, all these countries can be segmented. In some countries, like United States of America, in UK, they have somewhat hands-off policy for business organization. So in those countries, if you're running a business and if you're making profit in a legitimate way, then these countries will be more flexible to you, give you more freedom to explore. And if you have that power, they will even allow you to go to take over the competition. However, there are some socialist countries like Russia, or even better example will be North Korea. These countries believe in socialism, and they are somewhat inflexible towards the idea of competition. They believe in equal employment of, sorry, equal, not equal employment, equal opportunity for everyone. And in those countries, maybe you might feel demotivated to conduct business because the government is not willing to give competitive edge if someone can afford. However, you will find the other countries lie somewhere in between. So now you need to assess to what extent this is more prone to this side or to this side. So there are three reasons behind this, the importance behind this dimension. You need to understand why this is something you need to consider. First and foremost, legal system partially defines what an organization can and cannot do. So if you are going to a new country, new territory, you need to understand the laws, their rules and regulations, their legal dimension. Otherwise, it might not, you might falter when you are about to start your business over there. Legal procedures can stop you from moving further. Then pro or anti-business sentiment of the in the government, as I mentioned earlier, some countries are more flexible towards business. Some countries believe in people's welfare and they are inflexible towards the way of doing business. So that you can assess that as well. Then political stability has ramifications for planning. So for instance, think about our country's relationship with Pakistan. Now, if you are planning to go for Pakistan, you can certainly take this matter into consideration, and certainly find out that it might not be a good idea to conduct business with Pakistan